And in addition to the charges that we're talking about on the YouTube video in DC, there's other charges in DC as well, and they stem from...
That's correct. There was a marijuana smoke out in front of the White House on June 8th, the joint summit with President Chum of the Chum gang.
Okay. And there was a lot of marijuana being smoked at this place from very people. Not without saying whether or not you were involved in that. There was other people there, and there's actually at least one guy who ran away. Is that right?
That's right. It was a an open act of civil disobedience, and I was the only one that got arrested, which was kind of suspicious in and of itself.
Right.
And this is one more element in what is a chain of abuse. And I'm not saying that I necessarily should or should have not been arrested that day. But when I was arrested, being the only one, a little bit suspicious, and that the officer that was carrying me away, or one of the officers, was one that had been featured in a prior video, fits what is a consistent pattern for me.
There seems to be some definite retaliation. It at least appears, and your contention is a retaliation from the law enforcement.
Right.
They're sort of picking and choosing what they're doing. It's somebody near you or around you or whatever, or somebody runs away.
It's even more specific than that. I feature an officer of the Park Police in a YouTube video that shows them in an unflattering light, and weeks later, and I'm not saying that I don't create these situations or invite them, but in the way that I am singled out, in the way that I am physically abused in these situations,
so
or the way that they come after me with a SWAT team and everything else, is evidence of a clear pattern. And this goes back to 2011.
Nobody's saying, I think what you're saying, what I think people really are starting to understand is, you're not shying away from them chasing you, but their retaliatory measures are sort of excessive coming from somebody like that. I think that's part of your...
Certainly, right. Certainly.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in 2011, it was the Jefferson Dance Party, an officer that I had featured several weeks before, who claimed he had legitimate grounds to arrest me for dancing in public, did so in a particularly brutal way. He picked me up from behind, body slammed me, choke slammed me, kneed me in the ribs. And that was kind of the first major incident. When I was arrested in Philadelphia, I had the microphone in my hand as I was giving a speech, and a Park Police officer, who I had featured in a video several weeks earlier, came up from me from behind and tried to tackle me and ended up charging me with assault. At the smoke down on June 8th, the officer that arrested me, instead of picking me up by the armpits after cuffing me behind my back, picked me up by my hands. And I still have a little bit of nerve damage in that. I have some numbness in my hand, and I'm not going to whine about that. But then the greatest retaliation is this with the raid. And I was ready to be served with a warrant. I was ready to be arrested and face charges. I was ready to bring a Second Amendment challenge to the gun laws in DC. I wasn't ready to be handcuffed to the floor in my kitchen in my shorts for 5 hours and having a flashbang go off right in front of my face and having my home ransacked and having other charges fabricated against me.
Okay. And let's talk about that for a minute. So part of this thing on DC, without going into exactly what took place in that video, part of what your point is that our Constitution, that we have a right to do these things, is tell us what, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Tell me what your point is.
Well, I believe as free, beautiful, independent beings, we have a basic right to self-defense. And yes, there has to be an agreeable social standard for how that is exercised. And in the United States, that's through our Constitution. The Second Amendment makes it pretty clear, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And bearing is really a key element to that. It doesn't do you any good to have a firearm if you have to keep it locked and safe in your basement.
You have to keep it in your business or in your home.
Or if it has to be loaded or have a gun lock on it. And I understand there are appropriate regulations.
Now, one thing that we bring up a lot on some segments that I do is the purpose for it. And the Constitution actually sets out the purpose. In order for a free state, it's necessary to form a militia.
Right.
It's not about not having assault arms or something like that. It's not this benign thing to hide. It's in order to be able to form a militia, and that's where our right comes from.
It is the ability to exercise deadly force against another human being in your defense. It's an essential human right.
Okay, and that's what a lot of people who believe in the Second Amendment rights are arguing. Some people are just saying, hey, we just want some more guns, just let's hold some guns. Some people are saying when our state actors come, when our police knock down our doors, when they execute no-knock warrants, which is happening a lot these days, when those things happen, somebody has to be able to defend themselves, to form a militia so that the state doesn't control us. That's actually the constitutional purpose for the Second Amendment.
Even going to a a deeper level than that, the founders knew explicitly and said explicitly that the greatest threat to liberty was a standing army. And that's what we have in America today, which is worse than that. We have the greatest established defense industry that has taken over our government that uses it as an excuse to rip the American people off. And we know that the greatest defense of a nation is a well-armed populace, and that a standing army is a threat to the liberties not just of that nation, but to surrounding nations, which become a threat then to the prosperity of the people that field that standing army. And as Admiral Yamamoto said in World War II, the reason they wouldn't invade the mainland is they would find a rifle behind every blade of grass. And it's important to note in this misconstrued concept of defense, where Americans have been fooled into believing that we need a big military force to protect us, we forget the very essence of war and of what is a real security threat. And now, whatever legitimate threat that is greatly trumped up of terrorism that we're facing only exists as blowback. And for people that try to deny blowback, you have to be incredibly inhumane, devoid of empathy to think, oh yeah, the American government can just invade all these countries in the Middle East and nobody's going to mind. We can kill just hundreds of children with drone strikes and there's not going to be any repercussions. People are going to understand. They're not going to have any hard feelings. That's the implication.
And
more importantly, countries don't invade other countries. And we have been fooled in the very language that we use to describe what our government does as America did this, Germany did this, England did this, China did this, Japan did that. No, the governments of these countries do specific things. These gangs of criminals that have taken over a protection racket over these territories are responsible for these actions. And all of their motivations is to serve their sponsors, to serve the true beneficiaries, the real powers that be, the real string pullers, the rich getting richer as poor men die in rich men's wars. And it is, as Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler said, war is a racket, and he knew from his experience in World War I and all.
And this is really Democrat or Republican. We're not talking about.
It's not partisan. This is fundamental to the nature of government. Governments attack other territories in order to serve their sponsors, to expand their power base, to take over the tax base. A population that refuses to be taxed and exploited by any authority will never be taken over. And if anything, Afghanistan is a great example of this.
All right, well, the other issue that you're taking issue with is marijuana. And this smoke out, this demonstration, and you weren't the organizer of this demonstration, were you?
The one in DC I was. Yes.
You were the organizer of this demonstration.
Not the one in Philly though. I'm invited later as a co-organizer. I have to give credit to N.A. Poe and Steve Miller of the Panic Hour and Philly Normal for their great activism around these smokeouts that they've been doing every month since January.
But in this protest, one of the points of this is that you believe that the law is no longer valid for several reasons. One of them is doctors having found valid use because Schedule 1,
sure.
The actual legal definition of Schedule 1 drugs.
First, there's the basic principle of it. You as a free, beautiful, independent human being own yourself, your mind, your body. No one has a right to tell you what you can and cannot put in your own body. It's not a crime to be under the influence of any substances, no matter what words on paper exist to regulate that. The only potential crime and risk here that is legitimate is when you violate someone else's rights. And it doesn't matter if you're under the influence or not, that's always going to be a crime. That's always going to be a moral violation. So I believe that fundamentally you own yourself and all of these rights are inherent from that. So to violate that, the government comes up with various excuses and justifications to fool you into thinking that you're a slave. And of course, the consent of the oppressed is essential to the system continuing.
But on this particular issue here, that is your fundamental belief.
The excuse that is used is Schedule 1 classification.
But there's actually you're actually taking issue with the actual law and the way the law is applied. You're not so much. You've got your own version of that, which is not actually the application of the law in the United States at this time, anyway. But tell us more specifically the Schedule 1 issues where you're actually taking issue with why the law is misapplied in these cases now.
Well, Schedule 1 classification is the basis for the entire drug war. It's how the FDA classifies various substances. And Schedule 1 specifically says that it is a threat, it is a potential harm to society, but specifically it is of no legitimate medical value. And at the first
that is by definition a Schedule 1 drug.
Right.
You're taking issue with the definition.
And now you would think this would be thrown out legally a long time ago, because to this day, the federal government actually sends tins of joints to 4 remaining medical marijuana patients in this country that are a holdover from an old study. study from decades ago. Now, it's really shitty weed, at least from what I've been told. It's not the best stuff. And the guys that get it, they don't even smoke it anymore, because it's like, it's the Mexican trash compactor's swag.
But you've got a legal point here. I'm not addressing the legal point.
And for me specifically, for me to be arrested in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, now also has medical marijuana, but at any point that there would be a legal recognition of any doctor in America saying it's a legitimate medical value, a court should at least have to rule for or against the FDA classification being used as justification for all the drug laws in America. And in my case in particular, I've dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had a referral when I lived in California from a doctor for medical marijuana. And actually, I don't need it anymore, but I used to use it to help me sleep. I used to get woken up by nightmares, and it helped me sleep through the night. Very nice.
Okay, you're a war vet, is that right?
Correct, but I also have a prescription specifically, which is a higher standard than you need in California, in New Mexico for chronic pain, coming from various injuries sustained in service and through playing rugby for the Marine Corps team. But yeah, I was in Fallujah in 2004 with the Marine Corps Civil Affairs team.
Okay. There's a lot of people who think you're radical. Obviously, you're outside the mainstream, or at least somewhat for the moment. You agree with that?
Well, I would say that the mainstream is what's radical. It's sick, it's disturbed, and you look at the obvious results. If anything, I'm living a much happier, healthier life. Even here in jail, I feel like I'm a much better centered person than the average American. I don't mean this to hold over people's heads, but if the logical and moral and philosophical framework that I bring to life allows me to thrive and be happy under any circumstances, I mean, if you want to call that radical, I feel sorry for you being mainstream. And I think there are a lot of people in America who are miserable in their current conditions. And my approach, it's not mine, I don't want to take credit for it, but I think the values that I try to demonstrate, that I try to communicate, that I try to share with people through my activism, serves not only to enlighten people in a certain way, but empowers them to take control of their lives, to exercise true mental freedom and self-ownership, and be happier, healthier human beings as a result.
Well, one of the things we advocate is we advocate everybody getting radical. People are going to, I'm not necessarily saying people need to do exactly like you, I'm not saying I believe exactly like you, but people have to start realizing what they believe in. They've got to figure out what they believe in, they've got to start supporting it, because if they don't, we've got a government that's imploding, it's coming straight down on us. It's supposed to be directed by us, but we have no direction, no say-so, and they're buying us off with a little benefits here and a little benefits there to get people out. But I do want to go a little bit further into the marijuana, because we do have the issue with whether or not, if it's a Schedule I drug, it has no medical purpose, then how do we tolerate these states? It's a little bit like the immigration laws, where we're choosing just not to enforce laws. Either pick a law or not. You can't, we've got some issues with whether or not they're applying the law correctly across the board. They're arresting you here and not arresting people in Colorado or wherever else they might.
We have an obedience epidemic in America. That's the problem. People are willing to say, we hate Congress, we hate their laws, we hate what they do, but we're still going to pay our taxes, and as cops and border patrol agents and cogs in the machine, we're still going to do what they say.
All right. There's a few more other questions. I just want to kind of clear up what's out there. So we've talked about that you do have some charges pending in Virginia, you got some charges pending in D.C. There was a lot of miscommunication out there. I was just trying to clear some of that up. One of them was the radicalism. One of them is libertarianism. It is true that is what you kind of support, that type of philosophy, the things that the libertarians espouse.
Well, libertarianism has become a much more vague and general term. As it's become popular in the last 5 to 10 years, it's been co-opted by people as far left as Bill Maher describing themselves as libertarian. I mean, a guy who gave $1 million to Obama's campaign, to guys as far right, although he's coming more our way as Glenn Beck, and it's really beautiful to see him come our way, but he's been calling himself libertarian a lot longer than he's been, even close to libertarian. But libertarian, when it was really first coined as a term, meant something very specific. It was the belief in self-ownership and the correlation to that, which is the non-aggression principle, that it's always morally wrong to violate someone's self-ownership.
Okay. And the last thing I know of is atheists. They're calling you an atheist. Is that accurate?
I'm a member of the Church of Reason and Joy, and those are the values that I subscribe to. I don't believe in any of the traditional concepts of an external personified entity.
So that's not a self-classification, that's what somebody interprets your beliefs to be.
Sure, and if they want to put that label on me, atheists to the panoply of gods that humans have dreamed up of over the years, but I believe that whatever spiritual truths there are in the universe, they're much more simple and unified and based on what I would see as the synergy or entropy of the universe, which I think human beings recognize as love.
All right. Well, as I told you earlier, prior to the interview, I work with Think Inc. It's designed to try to get people to think, whichever side you may be on. We just ask that you start being able to justify what you're doing, to stop thinking because somebody told you to think, stop picking a side, Democrat or Republican, that's going to take you down the wrong road. I'm not the one advocating for libertarianism or anything else, but we do ask that people start to think. And you can see more of what we've got on defendbacon.com. Tell us one more time again your website.
AdamVersusTheMan.com, YouTube.com/Adam Kokesh, that's ADAMKOKESH, and Facebook.com/AdamVersusTheMan. I'm also running for president in 2020 on the platform of an orderly dissolution of the United States federal government. My message is pretty simple. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. The hard way is to wait for the system to collapse, to hope that this violent government doesn't hurt anybody on its way out.
Well, if we make it to 2020, I'm going to be a happy man.
The easy way is to face up to these problems, and you can go to adam2020.com to sign up for the email list for that.
And I can tell you, this government won't get us there.